podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter. How are you doing? How are things? You went to AASA this past week?
I did, yeah. So just getting back from Nashville.
Tell me about it.
Nashville's an interesting town. I mean, it seems like everything is one block from everything. I mean, even the airport is like 10 minutes away. It seems like a Sims type of world that has been created. And in this case, I can use Sims appropriately because I need a grocery store here. I need a honky tonk here. I need where the Predators play hockey right here. And there you go. But I did. It was a good conference. I gave a session on phone-free schools with two superintendents from Stonington, Connecticut. I also got to hear amazing leaders talk about how they co-create. Their decision-making is the co-creation with students and leveraging student voice. And so as I was watching and listening to Brian Letzi talk about that, and I thought, oh, Jamie would have loved this conversation. I also, Elena Zachary-Ross, who is superintendent in Ypsilanti, Michigan. She was partnered with Mount Diablo superintendent, Adam Clark, so from your area of the world. They were talking about how to improve middle school reading. And what I thought was really cool, so it was something that was profound that Elena said that so aligns with our guest today, Ted Dintersmith, in terms of really engaging kids and making their learning relevant. She essentially said, all right, stop with the drilling, the killing of reading. If you want to increase reading capacity among your middle schoolers, give them a reason to be excited about it. Like, give them a purpose. And her middle school kids, they expanded their career and technical ed, their CTE offerings from high school down to middle school. So kids were encouraged to really follow their interests. And that these interests were going to require them to read more. So instead of how do we get kids to practice more reading? It was, what do students care about enough that they'll read to get better at it? I guess all in all is shifting away from remediation to literacy as a purpose. And so I saw examples of kids who were taking broadcast TV classes. They have to write their scripts. They have to interview people. They have to read. Yeah. There was a student-run business or school store. They had to read market research and they had to interview people. And they can't do that without reading and writing. So anyway, I was super, super excited. Oh, can I tell you one other thing?
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, totally aside from our connection to our guest today, but it was total small world thing. Nick Lab, who I'm going to be working for in Cartagena, Colombia, was there. And I was just walking and I looked to my right and all of a sudden our eyes locked and I was like, what are you doing here? And I had forgotten he was the 2026 International Superintendent of the Year. And so he was being recognized there. So his parents had flown down from Iowa and got to meet them. And it was just a total small world kind of moment. So that was kind of neat.
I love it.
So tell me about your week. I know that as we're recording pretty close to our deadline because we release on Tuesdays. And so I know that you've just had a really exciting weekend yourself that I think also aligns with our conversation with Ted Dintersmith.
In some ways it does. I think we went down to Santa Barbara. My eldest goes to Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara. And he had been chosen as one of, I'm counting really what would be 20 students from both high school and university in a film festival for the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And cool. He produced a 10-minute short, just like the other students did. He got in for writing, and we all piled into the largest car I've ever rented in my life.
Just imagine you driving this bus.
Oh my God. Those of you that listen in states that have large cars, you are dreading me driving this thing. And it was a wonderful trip. I really enjoyed going down with my entire family. There was a bunch of us and we got to see all the student films and my son's student film. And what I think connects to Ted is following your passions. The difference is that there are probably two things that I want to bring up. One, at the university level, he's following his passions. He is majoring in film. He's also majoring in stats, and he is doing something that really brings him joy. And as a result, he is researching constantly. He's taking courses about the thing that he is very interested in. And so that happens. It feels like you get that access when you get to the next level beyond high school.
Yeah. And why does that have to be?
A good question.
Yeah.
Good question. I think he had some access in high school, and being a massive high school, there are thousands of choices. There's so many choices for kids that he could take film. He took film in high school. And he found his passion there in high school, just like the high school students that were in the film festival. And I don't think that's true for every place. I think it's obviously different for the majority of students that they don't have the access like that. And that doesn't mean, it doesn't take away from all the garbage that he also had to take while at the high school level, that Ted Dintersmith is basically highlighting, like, what we currently have doesn't have to be true.
Yes. I look forward to it.
So I'm excited to have people hear Ted talk about what he's discovered in his films and all of it.
So you ready to get into it?
I am ready to get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last thing I would say, because we always have a sponsor that we'd like to highlight, and the fact that I was at AASA, I actually walked by the IXL booth and took a little selfie of myself there. But what struck me is how their work connects to this interview that we're about to have with Ted Dintersmith. And Ted challenges us to move beyond chasing test scores and toward deeper learning, towards agency and real world readiness. And so I think IXL supports that in a powerful way also. And so they provide real-time data, that's true, and they provide personalized learning plans. They also give teachers the time back to do that human work that matters the most. So if you're ready to strengthen the foundation while reimagining what school could be, visit ixl.com/imperfect to learn more. All right, Jamie, you are listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan.
And we will see you on the other side. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Ted Dintersmith, a concerned citizen who's consumed with the urgency of reimagining school. As the founder of WhatSchoolCouldBe.org, he champions the idea that education its center must be inspiration and purpose, not percentile measurement. Ted is also the executive producer of the film Multiple Choice, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and that explores the career-based learning as a foundation for all students. And so, Ted, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Yeah, fantastic to be here. And I love your guys' work. It's fantastic.
Oh, you're so kind. It really, you and I are connected through someone who I know it means a lot to you, and that is Josh Rapoon, and I'm grateful to him for introducing us. I've really never met anyone more selfless, more committed to connection than Josh. He's always willing to connect you to somebody. Have you met this person? Would you like to talk to this person? And just always so supportive. So he's been so generous with his time and his talents. If it's okay, though, I'd like to start our conversation with a speech that you made at TEDx in Fargo, North Dakota. And boy, you really ingratiated yourself to the crowd when you was we love Fargo. Crowd went wild for you, Ted.
It's a great play. Actually,
no, I have no doubt. But I was like, really winning the crowd over. At the beginning of your speech, you shared that this whole journey that you're on to influence the future of schools really began with an email that you got from your kids' school about the important life skills that they were supposed to learn, something like 45 minutes a month. And then you mentioned that you, not in any kind of nefarious way, you were just kind of curious. You started to track your kids' daily experiences first with 2 columns. I think the columns were relevant and irrelevant. And then notice that the irrelevant column started to fill up pretty fast. Things like gerunds, right? So do you mind my asking you, and I couldn't resist, I had to add a gerund in there. When you look back at those moments now, the life skills sessions, the chart, what clicked for you? I mean, I guess, how did it change the way that you were thinking about your role in reimagining school?
Yeah. The invitation to parents to come in for the briefing was fairly open-ended, which probably is vital in the flow of things here, because it wasn't, this is what we're going to do. It was, come hear about a brand new initiative to teach your kids important life skills, which was inviting and open. It just made me think, my gosh, what a great thing. And got me thinking in advance, what do I think young kids would need to learn that would prove to be important life skills? So I show up and I've got my mental checklist of things, and it wasn't that. And it's like a lot of things in education, it was well-intentioned, and it wasn't, in this case, a bad idea, but it was once a month, we're going to have a 45-minute session, and we'll show pictures of tar-infested lungs and warn your kid not to smoke cigarettes, or we'll show gruesome car accidents and warn kids to drive safely or make sure they're in a car with us.
Gosh, it reminds me of like The Road Runs Red that we saw in high school.
And we remember those things. So they're not necessarily bad things, but it wasn't what I was thinking. And I had been handicapped and blessed in these respects. Handicapped in that at the time, and still to this day, I am not an education expert. I have not taught endless amounts of time in a classroom. I've not dealt with the things that you and your audience member largely have dealt with. But I spent my career in technology innovation. I had a very good sense, and still do, of how fast machine intelligence is improving. And so as I'm thinking about life skills, I'm thinking about them in the context of, as machines get better and better at doing certain things, what will kids need to be able to forge a fulfilling, purposeful career, to serve as responsible, informed citizens, and to lead happy, purposeful lives? That was my frame of reference. And none of that was covered. And that got me to thinking, let's look at what they are doing. And this was a middle school experience for my kids. And I just, as I said, I started with 2 columns: relevant and important, irrelevant. The irrelevant one filled up quickly. I was hard pressed to find anything I thought really would help them in their future. But then I started to look at what was actually detrimental.
You added a 3rd column, right?
Yeah, I added the 3rd column.
Yeah.
And I just saw again and again, they were being discouraged from doing what I knew would be essential for them going forward in life. So, challenging an assignment, or counter proposing an alternative, or raising a difficult issue, or trying to create their own initiatives. Things that I just said, whoa, agency, meaningful learning, tied to hireable skills.
Yeah. I mean, so many educators we talk about right now, at least the sort of forward-thinking superintendents that I have the privilege to get to know, are really thinking about this deeper learning. And it sounds like that's what you were looking for, things like project-based learning. So if you're interested in understanding the water system within your own community, and then maybe taking samples of that water, and then going to city council and talking about what are the things that we as a community can do to improve water quality, not just for those types of things that matter, that require critical thinking, but also are place-based, that it is part of their community kind of thing.
Yeah. And my expectation was not that that would be all of education. If I were calling the shots and we homeschooled a bit, that was all of education. But I thought it should be some of education. And it was not only not some of education, it was actively discouraged. And I said, wait a minute, when you're telling kids that they shouldn't be proposing something that they think is important, asking to swap something out that they didn't see a point to for something that they believed was important, and saying you can't do that because it would set a bad precedent, I'm like saying, isn't this the exact precedent we want?
We're arguing to maintain the status quo.
Yeah. And it was a school most of the families thought was a really good school. And I initially thought maybe it's just this school. And I started visiting other schools and interviewing people and chasing down these amazing contacts. So I'm deeply grateful for people who came before me. Like, I worked for several years with Sir Ken Robinson. I've collaborated many times with Tony Wagner. I mean, there are some people that have done heroic, wonderful work. But I just said, no, it's not a school. It's a model, right? It's a data-driven, high-stakes test score model that we use to define education success. And if somebody said to me, summarize your takeaway from everything, I would say this. America's chased high test scores for 4 decades, and it's a reason we're falling apart. It's just,
this high stakes, accountability obsessed thinking.
We've turned the essence of school into trying to eke out gains in math and reading scores. And the reading, what happens there? I mean, most kids leave high school hating to read. You know, the scores have been flattened down. The math, and I've got a book coming out in March on math, and we don't do any of the important math concepts and ideas that are not only important in life, but often life and death matters for us. We don't get to that. We bury kids in this sea of math micro tidbits that no adult uses and your phone does perfectly. And we use that to rank, sort, punish schools, districts, and kids and teachers with an accountability measure that makes zero sense.
Yeah. I mean, take us back to No Child Left Behind and this idea that we were going to punish schools who didn't have 100% proficiency, and that was going to be every school. And so then you're going to reconstitute schools, break up communities of learning, as opposed to taking a step back and saying, what do we want to create together? Of course we want children to know how to read. Of course they need to have numeracy skills and a basic understanding of how to do math. And at the same time, we have not encouraged them to even understand their civic systems, in terms of social studies. We haven't encouraged them to be curious or to innovate, because what we've been telling them, not even just, overtly, like just saying, you are not as good or as smart and you need to do better on this test.
Yeah. And the flow is so interesting, right? Like on the one hand, the goal of kids being able to read, like who's going to argue with that? But once you say data is the key, that leads you to every kid studying the same curriculum to prepare for the same exam.
Yeah.
Because to compare a kid in Tacoma to a kid in Akron, Ohio, to a kid in Tallahassee, Florida, they all have to be doing the same thing so you can compare them on the same metric. And what happens is the kids are being assigned reading content they find boring as can be for a good reason, because it is boring.
Yeah.
They're training to answer multiple choice questions about things like signs of author bias, which the average middle school kid, like that's not going to get them excited about reading. And so that difference, that universe where we invite kids to dive into books that play to their passions and interests, which seems to me to be an excellent way to impart reading skills. We don't do that, right? We say, here's what you've got to read.
Right.
Because it's more important for us to compare you to other kids than for us to align what we challenge you with your interest and passions.
I remember when I was an elementary school principal and I entered the school as a new principal and saw that each year they were reading Charlotte's Web. I thought that's going to be inspiring. Great story the first time, but oh my word, every year.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Ted Dintersmith. He's a concerned citizen, as you can hear. He's a former venture capitalist. He's someone who is consumed with the urgency of reimagining school. He's also the executive producer of the film Multiple Choice. And in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there are 3 dimensions, actually. Curiosity and creativity actually live in the nested patterns dimension. But I think I'd like to take us into a different one, and that's the leader's learning work. And that inside that dimension, there's a term, systems thinking and design thinking. And I'm going to go back to the speech that you made in Fargo, but you mentioned how school systems changed at the end of the 19th century and then have remained relatively fossilized. And I often think about Frederick Taylor. He would be so pleased to see how this factory model has remained almost unchanged for 2 systems in particular, prisons and schools. But there's someone actually who wanted to change this in 1912. Actually, between 1910 and 1912, Scott Nearing traveled the country looking for a way to search for those bright spots. He wrote a book called The New Education, Progressive Education 100 Years Ago. And I used it all the time as a way to remind us that actually people have been wanting to and agitating for change for a long time, and maybe we should probably listen to them. This individual, he went all across the country, and similar to the conversations you've been having all over the country, there's a gentleman here in the Seattle area named Don Nielsen. He was a Seattle school board member. He did the same thing. He went all around the country looking for promising practices around school. He and I don't agree on almost anything ideologically in terms of political kinds of things, and yet we both agree there's got to be a different approach to teaching and learning in schools. And so maybe we should figure that out together. But Scott said in his book, does education exist for children or do children exist for education? And he went on to say, if children exist for education, then they should either conform to its requirements, or if they can't or won't, they should just be mercilessly thrust aside. But if, on the other hand, education exists for children, then the primal consideration must be the child's needs. And I think in everything you've been saying, writing, and producing, that seems to be in the forefront of your mind. So I'm sorry for the monologue.
It's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating. And in my own way, I did what Scott did in 1912, but I should probably pay him, at least give him a thank you. And it's funny, it ties into that TEDx talk in Fargo, which
exactly.
I'm at home and I get a call from a guy there who was doing an incubator. And we knew somebody in common, and they said, Ted's a venture guy, you might want to talk to him. And we start talking about that. We're having an entrepreneurship discussion. And he said, oh my gosh, he said, this is interesting. I run TEDx Fargo. And he just got a note from one of the main speakers saying they had to cancel. So Peter, he said to me,
divine intervention.
Any chance you could come to Fargo next week and give this a talk? Now, I didn't even have a talk. It was just like, oh my gosh. But it was interesting. It's funny how the world works, because at that time, I'd been to 49 of the 50 states, but never been to North Dakota. And if Greg Tavine had been in any other state, I think I would have said no. But I said, hey, here's a good reason to go to North Dakota. Heck yes, I'll go. And so I'm like scrambling to pull together the talk. But as I'm doing that, I think, wouldn't it be interesting to travel a lot of different places and learn from the people doing the hard work in schools about what's working and what holds them back? which then led to this trip I took starting that fall where I went to every state in a school year. I went to all 50 states, 200 schools, and then I wrote the book, What School Could Be, insights and inspiration from teachers across America, highlighting those bright spots. So
I love it. That's amazing.
Actually, the book had already been written.
No, I mean, look, I think it needed a revision because certainly things had changed. There are fewer one-room schoolhouses. There are obviously at least not state-allowed segregated schools, although one could argue that they exist. But I think that Scott would have loved the documentary Multiple Choice. I mean, you showcase an innovation center where students, they collaborate, they create, they explore a huge range of career directions. And really, you're highlighting leaders and systems who are agitating for systems change. So tell us a little bit about Multiple Choice, how giving students that kind of autonomy, hands-on problem solving, how it really keeps alive the resourcefulness, the resilience that maybe traditional systems often suppress and ought to embrace and find ways to integrate into in a more traditional system.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll go back to documentary number 1, which was
Please.
To Succeed.
Fantastic. I mean, following those 4 students. Do you stay in touch with those students by any chance?
Yeah, we do. Thanks to Josh, we've done a couple of sort of reunion podcasts.
Oh, I love it. Okay. I knew that one. I'd heard one, but I wasn't sure if that's great.
Yeah, and the featured kids are doing really well. Getting interested in this, going back to when I first really focused on this and felt a degree of alarm. I said, I'm nowhere. Like I don't have deep experience, actually fairly shallow experience teaching. And what could I do that would be a contribution? And I'd seen and didn't like at all a film that got a lot of acclaim, Waiting for Superman, which I thought was like, no, this seems way too simplistic. Charter schools are great, public schools.
Exactly. Right. And if you get selected on the lottery, then your path to success is assured, which it is not.
Yeah. And I didn't know at the time that this was basically produced to end run teachers unions. But I also took real objection to, they had this cartoon of a teacher in front of a classroom reading the newspaper or something while kids are throwing spitballs. And I feel like, I don't know, I can't believe that's prevalent. Like that just seems so vilifying. And teaching, even not knowing much then, I had a degree of appreciation for how difficult and demanding it is to teach in classrooms. And it's gotten quite a bit worse since, as we know. So anyway, what can I do that would be an interesting original contribution? And I thought that a documentary could bring to life things in a way that books or op-eds or emails or whatever couldn't. And so not knowing anything, I did a search. I found this fantastic director, Greg Whiteley, totally fantastic. He's got a shelf full of Emmys, arguably the best documentarian in America today, and just pointed him in some interesting directions and trusted him to tell the story. And so I didn't realize at the time that when he landed on High Tech High, which is a charter school, that a lot of people would draw inferences about my views that weren't warranted. I'd sent him to a bunch of schools, including of all types, private schools, mainstream public schools, charters. I just said, find an interesting story that shows students pursuing their passions and interests, cutting across disciplines, doing ambitious projects that invite failure and getting back up, and failure and getting back up, and producing something finally to a high standard with teachers trusted to teach to their passion and expertise. That's the story we told. And I think it was brilliant. But the second thing I did around that, which informs Multiple Choice, which I'm going to get to, is after most likely premiered at Sundance, I had offers from Netflix and Participant to buy the film. I turned those down. And I had a lot of people saying, you're crazy. I mean, who would in their right mind would do that? And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not in my right mind. But I made the film. My whole goal with the film was not for somebody to watch it alone at home on a laptop or their TV screen, but to use it as a vehicle to bring communities together, to observe. The film goes out of its way to say, don't copy this, just observe. And what is it you like about this? And what are your concerns? That was it. And we did, from a cold start with really not knowing anything, we did over 10,000 community screenings with that film. Not 10,000 people saw it, but 10,000 communities organized together and saw it. And that led to the nonprofit What School Could Be and my trip and the book and a lot of things. I would say it's been way harder to get schools to change than I anticipated, way harder. And I think a lot of people saw Most Likely to Succeed and said, boy, we should do that. That looks, I did so many events with that. Nobody was throwing tomatoes at me. Nobody was saying, what a horrible.
No spitballs.
Yeah, people are like, just as I worked for several years with Sir Ken, he'd give these talks and he gets standing ovations. Like everybody viscerally knows we should be doing things like
Yes.
this.
So there are two pieces, right? So you have these external forces that really do motivate and inspire. And then as a superintendent, I can tell you, you come back and you may have some other believers who are pretty excited as well. And you are really working to agitate, to change the system. And the system will work aggressively to return to status quo. Those who have benefited from the system are not interested in change. Those who don't fully understand or think it's going to be hard work are not that interested in changing, or they think you're not going to be here long enough to see the change through because, quite frankly, in the United States in particular, superintendents last about 3 years. And if you're a leader of color or you're a woman in leadership, it's about 2 years.
Yeah.
And so they go, why would we make this ambitious decision if the person who's going to help lead it is going to ultimately not be here? And then we'll be looking at each other and we'll immediately go back to what has worked, not what school could be. And it's a terribly disappointing and dismaying outlook, although it's not a foregone conclusion. It can change, particularly if you think from a systems perspective of it ought not to be one person who's leading it. It ought to be the school board and the community really wanting that change and the teachers saying, we want something different. We want to love coming to work again. This has become miserable. Sorry to interrupt because I know.
Yeah, you're spot on. And the factors that I'd toss on the mix, right, is you've had, going back then, a decade ago, you had, for the most part, a college-obsessed set of parents.
Yes.
You had stuck-in-time college admissions. You have, and still have, punitive, obsolete accountability measures.
Yes, and your counseling departments only think that that college is the way to go. So they'll meet with every kid and say, what's your college plan?
And you had this sort of sense of, people would say, this looks really interesting, but it was kind of, if it's not broke, why do I want to go to the effort to fix it? And in my book, What School Could Be, I write about superintendents and principals and classroom teachers who were, but they're running into a stiff breeze. You know, what I think, and now we'll get to multiple choice, what's so interesting about this film is, while Most Likely to Succeed, I think, was ahead of its time and very accurate in predicting how this would play out, the timing for multiple choice could not be better, because you can't go a day without seeing a headline that says your college graduate may not be able to get a job. So the sense that college is the only way to have a successful life, I think there's a lot of skepticism being brought, appropriate skepticism being brought to that. And the sense that if we just jump through these hoops for 16 years, no matter how much debt we take on, people are saying, wait a minute. And so parents are, I think, legitimately freaking out. And that's an important thing. And I think many districts are hemorrhaging students because parents are getting concerned. They're pulling kids out of public school districts. It breaks my heart, but I think it puts real pressure, because every kid you lose, if it costs you 15 to 25K a budget, you suddenly say, maybe it is broke. Maybe it is time to fix it. And so the film, and having done documentaries, Most Likely to Succeed was a huge success. I've been one of the people behind other documentaries that ranged anywhere from pretty good to not great to actually some that were quite bad. So I'm not novice when it comes to documentaries. I know it's high risk. You may put a lot of time and money into it and have nothing to show for it. But I visited this school district in Winchester, Virginia, not thinking, actually saying, no matter what, I'm not ever doing another documentary. How could I top Most Likely to Succeed? I actually visited it because I got really pushed to visit it. And I visited hundreds of schools. Do I really want to do one more? I go there and I just said, oh my God, this story has to be told. And we tell it, right? And why did I say that? I think this is really important. These kids, it's an immersion in career-based learning, but it's not for those kids. It's not for the kids that can't cut it with the college-ready academic path. So let's throw them a lifeline, put them on a bus, stick something on their back that says not as good as or dummy or whatever, and call that satisfactory. No, it's for all kids. All these kids are immersed in career-based learning. And the all is pivotal here, right? Because half their kids don't go to college, but they've learned one or multiple skills. They've done internships. They hit the ground running. At age 18, they're going into great jobs And the skills in there, they call it brilliantly the Innovation Center instead of the Vocational Ed Center or the Last Chance Center or the Career and Technical Education Center. They call it Innovation Center. But innovation still includes firefighting. But there are modern things impinging on firefighting demands. It includes carpentry. But there are modern technologies that bear on carpentry. It includes welding, ditto. But it also includes cybersecurity and a lot of healthcare across all walks and digital media. And they're leaning into AI. But all kids go there. And the key is, and anybody who's done college counseling will understand this, a kid that wanted to go to a selective college who electively chose to take welding instead of AP chemistry will be penalized. It's offensive. It makes zero sense. I've given talk after talk to college admissions officers. The reality is you didn't challenge yourself with the most academically rigorous content. That is a negative. Here, that's what they do. I can't penalize them because that's what they do. And it serves multiple things. I mean, it helps all kids find their lane. That's a great thing. It pulls together the local community in an aspirational goal in a time when everybody feels so divided.
Absolutely. I mean, Robert Putnam would say in terms of an our kids kind of thing, it's bringing everybody together.
Yeah.
And will also challenge the stigma of who takes career and technical ed courses.
Because those jobs, by the way, are the safest jobs from AI. AI is not going to replace an HVAC technician, but AI is going to wipe out college level or entry level jobs for college grads. But the other thing is it gives that community a sense of unity and economic prosperity. And so people see the film, and I'm gratified when people come up to me after they watch it and say, I thought I was going to see a film about a high school. And I did. But I think I really saw a film about a community and what a community can do when they work collectively and productively to create better futures for all. And so I'm like, okay, I'm thrilled that the team that produced the film knocked it out of the park. We've done already a couple major film festivals with more commitments already in place. High quality film, same community screening model, but this time we've got the A+ team, a great call to action for that is design thinking based. How can a community who sees this, who says, yes, we in our own way want to emulate that? What are some small steps, some committees you can form or task forces so you can make progress? But I think at the end of the day, leads to the role of this book I've written about math is, and we're trying, and I think making real headway in getting to governors, but we're in a world where the U.S. Department of Education is being dismantled. I'm not in the camp of saying this is horrible. I think it's been far more harmful than good. So I'm like, okay, you're taking a bulldozer to it. As long as the kids in the least advantageous circumstances get comparable or more money than the kids in the well-off circumstances, that's what I care most about. A level or even counterbalanced playing field so we don't pile further hardship on the kids that need the most support. But states can run with things now. There's no excuse for any state to say we can't do it because the federal government is holding us back. And so I'm talking to a lot of governors now, and I'm saying to them, the single most important thing you can do is rethink accountability measures. Because if your superintendents are held accountable to math and reading scores, there can be a lot of grassroots support. There can be educators that say, yes, let's do this. There can be business folks that say, how can I help? There can be parents that say, absolutely. But as long as there's that essential tension between what makes sense and what prepares kids for adult life and how we measure schools and how our reporters describe quality of education, it's much harder, right? It's much harder. And so my book goes right at one of the two big measures, which is math, and says, look at all of these absolutely important math ideas that each chapter tied to an idea or concept starts with something done with kids grade 1 through 8. This isn't graduate school math. This is estimation starting with how do you estimate the number of jelly beans in a jar.
Right.
Which,
tell me the name of the book. Is it Aftermath?
Aftermath, yeah.
Okay, good. And
we're pretty good at titles.
Yeah, you are. And for those who are listening, if you do want to see, Ted actually has a QR code on the screen here. So there is a video version. You can look at it on YouTube. If you'd stop moving his head, then we can see the QR code. And so that's great. And I want you to tell me a little bit more about that. I will tell you, in the school district where I was superintendent, I had such an innovative team. And one of the things that they suggested that we do as a way to provide opportunities and options when it came to math was ninth grade was certainly, lots of kids took algebra, either in 8th grade or ninth grade, but in fact, they created a course of entrepreneurship in algebra. So on A days, they were learning the principles of algebra, and then on B days, they were running a t-shirt company because they wanted them to apply the principles of algebra to an actual business so they could show. And it wasn't, they thought this would be for kids who had failed algebra and maybe who were resistant to math. Everybody wanted to take this course. And the second course in 10th grade was geometry and home building. So on A days, they were learning geometry, and on B days, kids were building tiny homes that then were donated to a local community agency so it could become a home for those who are unhoused. And so when you were asking kids about, tell me about this geometry class you're in, we had our school foundation who helped pay for the materials and things like that in case we were going to run into criticism from the community of you're spending taxpayer money on these kind of things. The foundation stepped in and first paid for the materials. And kids would say, I'm learning geometry and I'm learning home building. And I also know that next year, the family won't be cold because I'm building this right now as January is outside. And so thinking about like building those empathy skills and the compassion that goes into understanding I'm part of a bigger community that needs to take care of others. So I love the fact that you've written a book that is thinking about the practical applications, the reason behind, and how to build math skills and why it should matter. Is that kind of the way it?
Yeah, and I think what goal do we have for all kids coming through? It seems to me a goal we ought to have for all kids is to understand math's most important ideas, to see the excitement in math and understand how it affects them, like it or not. And if it moves them, to see that their real career path's there and let them go deeper on the kind of math that I went quite deep on, but then most people will never use, because I've got this chart, and it's in the book, where I put up basically all the concepts covered in high school math beyond fractions, decimals, and percentages and ratios. And then I ask adults, can anybody find anything out of these 75 topics that you use and can explain to everybody else? And the reality is nobody remembers anything about arcsecants or piecewise linear functions or irrational numbers or factoring polynomials. It's like this blur. It really is.
In fact, they just become irrational when you start asking about it.
It's really a hazing ritual that serves one group's interest only, which are the testing companies, right? I mean, these little micro tidbits your phone does perfectly and adults don't use, they are perfect fodder for a 35, 45 question standardized math exam. So that's what we test, and therefore that's what we end up having to teach. And yet, if you don't mind, let me just tell you, this story, I think, makes the case. So I'm talking to somebody about the book and what I believe about math. Far more important to cover the important ideas. We bury kids in a sea of math micro tidbits that adults don't use. They say, oh, you ought to talk to so-and-so. They're very influential in math education policy. So I connect with this so-and-so, and they start off by telling me they're very influential in math education policy. And I start talking about what I believe. And she stops me and says, just wait, Ted, wait. You don't understand. There's a reason during COVID, as we know, that many of the Ivy League schools no longer required SATs, but now you see they're requiring them for students now. They've returned to making SAT scores or ACT scores mandatory. The reason, Ted, which you don't understand, is that SATs turn out to be a really important predictor of success later in life. I said, that's very interesting because I actually have a section about that in my book. So tell me how you know that. And turns out, right, that this person didn't know who did the study, that it was done by the College Board, which has a huge financial interest in these tests, didn't know how they define first success later in life. Turns out it's first year college GPA, didn't know what the study found, doesn't know what a correlation is, doesn't know that the study found it was a 0.31 correlation between SAT scores and first year college GPA, and doesn't know you need to square that to get the R squared, nor did this person know that any statistician would say a 10% R squared disproves the assertion, doesn't validate it. And I said, you make my point, right? When the people that control the math agenda at schools are themselves math illiterate, bad things happen. And would we rather our kids have the skills to be able to dissect an analysis where some story comes along and says SATs are an amazing predictor of success later in life, knew what questions to ask, knew what a correlation was,
Right. Or even correlation versus causation, because everybody conflates the two.
Yeah. And I've got a big section on that. And these aren't just important ideas. I mean, these can be life and death ideas. So I'll give you another example on the life and death front is, and this is true for almost all medical doctors are confused about this. The probability you have the disease if the test is positive versus the probability the test is positive if you have the disease. They sound the same, right? Mm. And a test, if you have the disease, can be 80 to 90% accurate. But if you get a positive result on the test, your probability, in the example I worked through, based on somebody else's research, shows that the test is 80% likely to be positive if you have the disease. But if the test is positive, your likelihood of having the disease is just 2%. 80% versus 2%. Doctors will tell you, oh, the test came back positive. You almost certainly have the disease. You need to understand that because many patients will then rush, make a quick decision, feeling like they have days to live and regret. These are not inconsequential ideas.
Yeah.
And yet we will have kids build out a binomial table, flipping a coin, or compute the likelihood of getting an 8 when you roll a pair of die. And they don't understand the odds of playing the lottery or betting on FanDuel and it's just, wait a minute, it's the story of U.S. education, right? We teach what's easy to test, not what's important to learn.
Let me ask you, if people wanted to screen multiple choice, how can their community do that?
Okay, so your listeners are going to be really grumpy at me, okay? And because I get this all the time. Can I watch it on Amazon Prime?
No, and obviously the answer is no, because you want it to be a community event. So I'm curious.
If you just go, and we'll put all the links in your page notes, but if you go to Multiple Choice, the film, we lay out for you how you can screen it in your community. I do want to apologize. When I started with Most Likely to Succeed, I feel very defensive about this, so bear with me. When we started with Most Likely to Succeed, we offered it to communities, and the question came up of price. And I said, they need the money more than I do, no charge. And we had all these communities that would spend a lot of time and then come back and say, we're really not going to move forward with this. And our team would say, how come? And they said, if we're going to go to all this trouble, we want to make sure it's a good film. And I'm like, would you tell them Sundance premiere? I mean, Sundance is harder to get into than Harvard. They said, if it's a good film, why is it free? I said, okay, we can fix that. So we charge, as I say, I feel so guilty about this. So there's a screening fee, I think it's $250. We have a very generous scholarship thing. If the budget's your issue, just let us know. But go there and bring it to your community, because when people come together, they get excited about this. And you're not going to make changes unless you've got community support. And then we also offer ways for every attendee for you to reach out and say, would you be willing to do something here to help us move our school more directionally toward every kid being exposed to career-based learning?
Yeah. And this is what I would say. If you are going to screen this as a community, and I'm not sure if you've had this experience, Ted, you ought to do it, I would say, in partnership with if you have a chamber of commerce in your community. And the reason why I'll say that is because for a number of years, we were trying to create an early college program, and it really just wasn't going anywhere. And then as a community, we would go visit sister cities. So we went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Washtenaw County, Michigan. They have an early college program where kids in their high school years, and they can go to the local community college, and they can graduate with their associate's degree as well as their high school diploma. And at that point, our chamber who was there, and our city council members who were there, and our county officials who were there, and our local universities and local colleges were there, they all said, we need to do this. And it was like, oh, let's go. And that became this rallying cry for us to create an early college program. For now, kids can graduate their local high school. They have all rights and privileges as a high school student. They can join the band. They can be on the football team. They could be in the school play and all those kinds of things. They can also leverage the talents of their high school teachers if they're struggling in class and need a little extra support. But they can graduate with their AA degree and their high school diploma. And their next step is to be able to graduate with industry recognized credentials and their high school diploma. So game changer for families on how to afford college. The real movement comes when you truly are doing this with your local community who say, here are the things that we need in this community in terms of graduates, and they'll rally with you. I don't know. Have you seen that?
No, we've gotten a large amount of inbound interest from chambers of commerce.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear on this point, because I think we tend to think of education as this relative allocation of effort to career versus academics. And I think people need to step back and say, we really are allocating among career, legitimate, authentic, deep understanding of academic topics and test prep. And in US schools today, test prep isn't 5% or 10%. It is most of it. And I'm very proud. I mean, I spent my career before this chapter, the last 15 years, in technology businesses. And so my background, undergraduate, I did major in physics, master's in physics, PhD in engineering, but also as an undergrad, I double majored. I majored in English. In 30 years in technology businesses, far and away the most important aspect of my education were those literature courses.
My wife, who's an English professor and Victorian literature, is going to be thrilled to hear this part of your comments.
Huge mistake to think that the liberal arts are frivolous or not. Right. And so when I say more career-based education, I mean that appended to deep pursuit of really challenging, interesting intellectual topics and meaningful civics.
Yes.
And I think that when you look at that and say there are not enough hours, the reason today there are not enough hours is that most of school is test prep. And if we can shift accountability to look at our kids leaving high school at age 18 with multiple interesting life choices, hence the title multiple choice, where they have explored and understand what career paths appeal, align with their interests and talents, where they've realized the deep satisfaction of applying their skills to make their community better. And when they go deep on interesting intellectual content, we show this kid who wants to be an EMT or a surgeon talking about reading Plato on his own because he finds it interesting.
Amazing.
Yeah, like we can do those things. And I think the power here is with parents freaking out about AI's impact on hireability, with businesses over and over again saying we can't hire people with relevant skills, with superintendents feeling I need to be offering more compelling things to keep my families here. I think we've got an opportunity.
Ted, I want to ask you a question that I ask every guest. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I mean, you're talking to the right person, right? Because I am about as imperfect as you're going to get. I think it's this, and Howard Gardner first advanced the idea of multiple forms of.
Oh yeah. I know my background is blurred, but I have frames of mind, multiple intelligence, the unschooled mind. So influenced me as an educator.
Yeah. And I think it's just stepping back and saying on a lot of these dimensions, we're either going to be bad. We're certainly going to be imperfect everywhere. We're going to be bad at certain dimensions, but every human has their strengths. And if we, instead of standardizing everything to rank, that's the irony, right, of U.S. education is we only care about one incredibly narrow measure of intelligence, which turns out to be
logical, mathematical, and linguistic proficiency.
Which turns out to be exactly what AI does perfectly. And there's a reason, right? Because we measure success based on exams administered at such scale, they have to be graded by a computer. And if a computer can grade it, a computer can do it. So of all the different ways we could prioritize helping kids find their lane, we picked the one that is right in the crosshairs of AI. And I think on the imperfect front, I spent my life backing startups. And we used to say there are only two kinds of startups, the ones that fail that figure out what to do and ultimately succeed, and the ones that fail that don't figure out what to do. But they all fail. You never get it right at the start. And I think that accepting and embracing imperfection is the essence of innovation. And if we're not creative and innovative, and Sir Ken would say this as well, if you're not comfortable with failing multiple times, you're not going to do anything bold. And if you can't do anything bold, you're probably pretty irrelevant in a world where machines do everything routine. So find that audacity.
I have never heard the multiple intelligence description so well done in the sense of if these are the two that we only measure and only focus on and AI can do it, then we ought to maybe think about the others. I thought it was amazing. Our guest today was Ted Dintersmith. And Ted, I want you to know a few things. One, so Jason, who is his school district is featured in multiple choices. He's next week's guest. So it's perfect. It's like we get to start with you and then we get to meet Jason. And I want listeners to come back next week because Jason's going to talk about, in particular, one of the things that they're learning about their system in terms of having the innovation center. But what does that mean for the rest of their system? and having to kind of think through that piece of those mid-course corrections and how do you do that. So please come back and listen. But Ted, a concerned citizen, someone who's consumed with the urgency of reimagining school, and you are really doing something about it. And one of the things that I thought to myself is every week I hope to have a guest who is A, inspiring, B, future thinking, really encouraging us to think about what schools could be, C, compassionate, or in my mind, human-centered, really thinking about that, and so D, all of the above, because I had to go with a multiple choice sort of finish here. I'm really grateful for your time, Ted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for all you're doing. It's inspiring.
We are back.
Let's see. Where do you want to start today?
I would say that for me, my heart is always warmed when I get to engage with individuals who are not necessarily public educators, and they get it when we talk about like moving away beyond the obsession with standardized testing, because schools are just under the thumb of legislatures at the state level who are just repeatedly trying to say that they need to fix schools, and the way to do that is just to test more. And to me, I find that so insulting. And when Ted said, hey, listen, if a computer can grade it, a computer can do it. That really were like schools are training students for the exact tasks that AI is poised to replace. And if that's not a compelling reason to engage students in their interests and to really create pathways for them to do the work that AI can't replace, I don't know what is. So for me, that's kind of where I wanted to start, was sort of this, let's move away from the data-driven high-stakes world that currently exists and let's stop. He said America's focus on eking out gains in math and reading scores has been detrimental to actual learning. And so,
true.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I want to start.
So true. And I think I have met so many people who are aware of that, but the inertia of the public school system makes it, I mean, you were the leader of a very, what I would argue, in a college kind of progressive public school system. And
status quo is very comfortable. We know who wins, we know who loses, we know who benefits. And those who are on the benefit side of the ledger, they're not that interested in seeing a ton of change.
Correct. What they don't realize is that the benefit doesn't go away.
I'd also say that in the environment in which they have benefited is about to radically change.
Yes, this is also true. But it's like arguing, when you argue for increasing multiple perspectives or diversity within a space, and people fight for keeping the way it has always been. It's always been this way. What they don't see is the gain that comes from multiple different perspectives or experiences, multiple languages. What's the benefit of having speaking multiple languages? You speak multiple languages.
Yes. And you have access to a whole nother world. I mean, that language serves as a bridge to understanding culture and values and art and
exactly. Different ways of thinking.
Yes.
And you'll be able to do things in your life differently as a result of that. Or keep it the same, but at least you have a choice. Like without it, you get only one choice, the way in which your brain currently only thinks, and it goes that down the direction, which is what Ted is saying. Like Ted's journey to visit all of these schools and be touched by all of the different kinds of things that are possible. This is probably my big nitpick with Ted, is that I'm so grateful that he sees the light. I would like him to fund teachers doing that.
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
I think one of the things that is so hard in changing the system is that there is so little inspiration for educators to try something new. And they end up being these isolated cases. So High Tech High, that he mentions in his first film, that he ends up focusing on in his first film, ends up having to create a whole system for people coming to see their school because no one goes to see other schools. They just keep going to High Tech High over and over and over again. Not that they shouldn't, but the fact that they've only got they're thinking of one choice is what's crazy to me.
Let me see if I understand correctly. What I think I hear you saying is, so this work that Ted has done in terms of leveraging his influence and ability to highlight and to capture what is happening in, for example, at High Tech High, and then in his new movie in Multiple Choice, in Jason Van Hukelem's school district in Virginia, is to say, this is really exciting and something that the world should take notice. And it's one thing to be able to provide those films and those documentaries for communities to watch and to in their own right to become inspired about starting to think about what school could be for them. And that what I think I hear you saying is there's one piece that possibly is missing here that Ted might want to even think about, which is begin funding an externship or some type of ability for teachers to go visit other schools who they themselves are saying, we're doing some really innovative things. And some type of system that allows them to go visit. Almost like Ted is projecting a light on some of these really exciting places. And you'd like to see the distribution of flashlights for others to say, look, there are some other things going on here, and I want others to come visit and to see and to begin to get inspired and make changes.
This is what I want to offer to,
Is that something?
Yes, this is what I want to offer to Ted Dintersmith. What I want to offer to Ted Dintersmith is let me help you connect to people throughout public ed, educators, who could do what you did or some smaller version of what you did, that they too become inspired. That the film alone is one thing. Going and talking to people, getting to interview other people, seeing in real time. We give public educators so little professional learning. When professional learning comes, to your point around testing, professional learning is about adopting a new curriculum, better understanding how to make sure that the tests are implemented in thoughtful ways. The professional learning is so rarely about innovation, about inspiration. It is about implementation.
I like the fact that there are community screenings happening all over the country.
That was my favorite part about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think to some extent it is trying to get at one piece of what you're advocating for. I do see the difference in trying to combine the two, giving people the opportunity to sit in community and not watch it on their own on Netflix. He was intentional about selling it to Netflix and other distributors, that he wanted this to be a community gathering and community conversation. Right. And then potentially for those who watch the movie as a community, that there are either funds available to them if they don't have them, to now identify a district that is doing interesting things and then send a team to go visit. Because there's power in the visit, and there's almost as much power in the journey to the visit and the journey home. That uninterrupted time together as a team to begin planning out what could schools be. And it sounds like that's kind of what
this leads to. I mean, that leads to a whole another arm of professional learning that I highly advocate for and that I try to replicate in my own work, which is very difficult. And that is, don't call it a retreat if you're meeting in the same room. That is not a retreat. That's just a meeting. Can I ask one more question as we have this conversation about him? He said, basically, once you say data is the key, that leads you to every kid studying the same curriculum to prepare for the same exam. Because it's more important for us to compare you to other kids than for us to align to you or challenge you with your interests and passions.
Yes, that's the emoji that makes me go, the brain glowing one. Because I thought, oh my God, I've been complicit in some of this.
The one thing I wanted to ask about it is that I actually don't think that statement about once you say data is the key that leads you to every kid studying the same curriculum. That is not 100% true. That once you say data is the key, if you want ease and basically you want it to be quick, then yes, it will lead down to the path to everyone. But this is why teaching's basically impossible in the current structure that we have. That if you give me as a secondary teacher 180 kids and I'm saying data is the key, data to me is about formative assessment. It's about understanding each kid's needs, where they are, what the data that a formative assessment tells me is it tells me what kids understand and don't understand about a concept. And that kind of data is all over the place. It is not mass data. It comes all crazy. I mean, those of you just listening, my arms are going nuts. It doesn't come clean like a benchmark or a summative assessment at the end. And so it's within that mess that you then have to figure out, like, what are the best things to apply for kids to learn the concept, and that they're not all going to be the same. They're going to be different. And
yes, I think you've argued this in past interviews, which is giving kids multiple ways to demonstrate that they've learned. And that becomes messy if you're accountability obsessed in terms of just one type of test, whether it be
also overwhelming.
Choice. Sure. And it creates, I feel for the teacher too, when we say sort of like with ease, we should give them multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery. Great. Give me the time to actually make sure that I can give them feedback. on where they are excelling, their strengths, and then where they might be falling short in terms of like where we need to sort of meet their needs in terms of the skills that they're missing.
Correct. Can we stop? I mean, let's stop with periods altogether. Why are we even doing the concert chunks of time?
There are those, though. I mean, I feel it myself when I was an elementary teacher. There are certain areas for which you have greater capacity or you feel more comfortable. And so then you stay in the areas for which you have strength as opposed to like...
In this very moment, you and I are talking about the creation of a new thing in that, okay, let's say you do stay in your strengths. Then you're not the best choice for the ones that you're weak at.
Sure. And that's why you see, particularly in elementary, there are some that will actually break up into this one teacher does the math, this one does science, this one does social studies, this one does English language arts. Wow. And the kids rotate around to each other's classrooms. And there's some benefit in that. And there's also some drawbacks. So yeah, there are lots of innovative ways that people are trying to approach this and meet the needs of kids. And I guess it goes back to your first question of how can we get more people visiting each other and highlighting the interesting ways that people are meeting the needs of children and adding it as a value add to this existing growing documentary repository or whatever you want to call it in terms of highlighting some really exciting places in our nation.
I would love the best examples that I've seen are, and these are within the system that we currently have. So creating a system, this is why handing flashlights to others that I'm asking Ted to do is going beyond the current system. Within the current system, let's say you stay within the current system, going beyond seems overwhelming. We're not going to have the time to do that. We stay within our current system. Then what I need you to do is I need you to start having teachers that loop with kids, that start knowing how to teach multiple different grade levels. I need you to have teachers start team teaching together. The whole push-in model as it relates to
almost a Waldorf, right? Where you start at kindergarten, and then if it goes to sixth grade, they travel with the kids all the way to sixth grade. And they're a part of the continued development of children and their own development as educators. Yeah,
they become very knowledgeable about all the different child development stages in a kid. No more 30-year vets at one grade level. That doesn't make any sense. We need to have multiple experiences, and that's really hard.
I like the looping piece because then you find out what kids are interested in, and they may maintain that interest all the way through, and you could really see and go deep into that development. And so that's, I think, Ted has really talked about was student agency, and then really thinking about what can community collaboration look like in terms of a whole community coming together to rethink what schools could be, not just leaving it to the schools to sort of dictate, decide, or sort of posit for their community. Make this a community decision. So I knew you would find this conversation pretty interesting. And what's really cool is next week, we get to meet the superintendent who's highlighted. He and his district are highlighted in multiple choice.
Oh, that's great.
So he's our guest. So
that's so fun. I can't wait to hear that.
And so he does an after-action review that is, I think, you will find pretty interesting because there are pieces in there about how exciting it is to be a part of something so innovative. And what does it mean for the traditional high school that's looking at this innovation happening right next door?
I love it. I love it. I'm excited to do that.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. We're super excited that you join us each week. It was so nice to see people at ASA. My friend from Connecticut who said, she mouthed across the room, I listened to your podcast. So I'm super happy that people do join us. And I got to see a number of people just passing around. I saw Monique there, saw Akil from Uniondale, New York, and from Long Island. And she gave such a big hug. And so it was just really cool to see people left and right and to know that, Jamie, each week we get to make a difference in that we're thought partners with our colleagues across the nation and all over the world. So that's pretty neat.
That's more than neat. That's really special. That's really,
that
really
is special.
So
thanks for giving us your time each week. Jamie, I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class. I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
This is Greg Meyer, Jamie's partner at APC Leadership Collaborative. Superintendents know that school principals are the single biggest lever that any school district has for improving student joy and success. Unfortunately, there's very little professional development for the specific things that a principal has to do to improve their school. At APC Leadership Collaborative, we specialize in coaching principals to take on audacious goals, build their leadership skills, and make big improvements in their school. If that inspires you, let's connect and talk about how we can collaborate. Find APC Leadership Collaborative online at apccolab.com.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.